All right, excellent. So this is lecture 7. So we finished up last time talking about family Cyprinidae, which are the carps and the minnows. And again, they're members of this superorder Ostariophysi, which are these fish that have this sophisticated connection between the swim bladder and the inner ear. So these things hear very well in Ostariophysi, this Weberian apparatus in the head. Closely related to family Cyprinidae is family Catastomidae, which are the suckers. Sometimes we call them catastomids, named after the family here. And so here is an example of the lake chub sucker, Aramizon saxetta, family Catastomidae. These things are very characteristic. They look kind of like a carp or a minnow from the side, but if you look at their mouths, almost all of them have this very distinct terminal or ventral mouth. So they have very thick lips with fleshy plicae, and plicae are tight folds of skin. So these are plicae here, or papillae. And papillae are these tiny finger-like projections here. So oftentimes when you're trying to tell the difference between different species of suckers, the presence or absence of plicae and papillae are oftentimes a good characteristic. But generally speaking, this family as a group, this mouth structure is quite distinct. They also have a very sophisticated pharyngeal teeth in the second jaw inside of the head. So their pharyngeal jaw is very well developed, and that's because they primarily eat algae, insect larvae like midges, and also aquatic invertebrants like shellfish or like clams and things like that. And so these pharyngeal jaws designed to pulverize those invertebrate exoskeletons. So they take these ventral mouths and they sort of dig around in the muck and they find benthic creatures to eat. 70 species in the family. They're broadcast spawning. They release their gametes. Fertilization occurs exterior to the body, and sometimes they spawn on gravel or sand bottoms. So these are family Catastomidae, the suckers. So here are some examples of North Carolina suckers. Again, when we look at the lab portion of the course, some of these are ones that you might have to know. So we look at, for instance, the creek chub sucker, Aramizon oblongus. It occupies small rivers and creeks, often highly vegetated, less often in ponds. So it's more of a lotic fish. A diet, again, organic detritus, algae, diatoms, midge larvae, small clams, and some plankton. So they do a little bit of filter feeding as well. Northern hog sucker in the mountains of North Carolina, clean streams with medium to swift current. Does not do well in polluted water or water with a lot of sedimentation in it, like cloudy water. They really like clear water. Max length about 24 inches. You know, most suckers don't get all that big. They like kind of a sandy or gravel bottom like this. And then here's the golden red horse, also in the mountains of North Carolina. They migrate from large rivers into smaller tributaries or streams, where they then spawn at night in the shallow ripples of those streams. And then 2 males will press a single female between them, while all 3 fish then release gametes. And then fertilization occurs external. No parental care. The fertilized gametes just sort of flow downriver. Young can be seen in schools feeding along sandy bottoms and pools. Again, max length 30 inches. So these things don't get very large. But again, if you look at all the mouths of these things, they're quite distinct. And that's a characteristic there of family Catastomidae. So with that, I'll show you a video here about the robust red horse. And this is a video by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service talking about conservation efforts, because a lot of these fishes really do like clean, clear water. They don't do well with pollution. They don't do well with runoff. And so a lot of these things are not necessarily threatened and endangered, but a lot of them are considered imperiled. So here is recovering the robust red horse.
Well, we were conducting a fishery survey on the Oconee River in 1991 for the relicensing of Sinclair Dam when we we collected these 5 large fish, members of the sucker family that we could not identify. So we contacted some local experts on this group of fish and conducted an investigation and pieced together gradually over a period of a couple of years exactly what this fish was. Well, it turns out that the robust red horse was actually initially described by the naturalist Edward Cope in 1869 from the Yadkin River in North Carolina, and then essentially disappeared from the scientific record for over 100 years until these fish from the Oconee River led to its rediscovery and really the beginning of this now 20-year recovery effort.
Georgia Power became involved with robust red horse because the fish was actually discovered in the Oconee River below one of our hydro plants during a relicensing project. So from a dam owner perspective, that can be a little interesting. All of a sudden, this fish species that nobody's seen for 100 years that may in fact be in jeopardy is now in our tail race and ultimately affects the way that we operate. So Georgia Power has been involved since the very beginning.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Georgia Department of Natural Resources, and Georgia Power collaboratively developed an agreement called a Candidate Conservation Agreement with Assurances, or CCAA, to aid in the recovery of the robust red horse. Broadly speaking, CCAAs are one tool in our toolbox that we can collectively use to recover these at-risk species. CCAAs are a pre-listing recovery approach, meaning that the service works with our non-federal partners to conserve these at-risk species before they're listed under the Endangered Species Act. And specifically speaking, for the robust red horse CCAA, we had 2 main objectives. The first objective was to establish a new population within the historic range of the species, and that's where we are today, the Ocmulgee River, Georgia. And the second objective was to contribute to the understanding of the habitat use and life history requirements of the fish.
When the robust red horse was first discovered, it qualified for listing, but because of the urgency of the need for conservation, a pre-listing recovery approach was decided as the course of action. We've gone from 1 population to 6 populations, and those populations seem to be in really good shape. So the need for listing is much less now than it was when we found the animal initially. The Candidate Conservation Agreement is a good vehicle for formalizing the work to be done in any conservation action. In this particular case, we had a very large group of partners and stakeholders, each doing various conservation measures.
Like all species, the robust red horse is, the legacy of millions of years of evolution and struggle, and that would be a tragedy to lose. I mean, we cannot afford to lose any more species. I mean, if our ecosystems can't support a diversity of species, then at some point maybe they would not be able to support us.
The question that we're often asked is it worth it? Was it worth engaging in this and putting forth a lot of effort and a lot of money up front in order to ultimately or hopefully protect the species? Well, the reality is, from a business perspective, yes, because there's a lot more risk in a... So while we may spend thousands of dollars on conservation activities now, it's a lot less risky than finding out 10 years down the road that we have a significant endangered species issue that could be costly orders of magnitude greater than what we've spent already. So definitely from a business perspective, dealing with the known is much cheaper than dealing with the unknown.
All right, so that is recovering the robust red horse. So it looks like we might have, what is this, chat? Yes, Linnea, please answer those. Thank you. All right. So next topic here is family Characidae. Let me get my pointer. So again, I'll start off feisty, so very good hearing in these fishes. We're looking at family Characidae, the Characins. So this is a typical Characin right here. So if you look at this as an order, Characiformes, again, you see This really does it end in day or Ormes family order. Characiformes is a vast, diverse group with about 10 families recognized, and this includes the piranhas, the tetras, the pacu, and also the cavefish. So a lot of these tetras are aquaculture, they're aquarium fish, freshwater aquarium fish. And then, of course, the pacu and the piranha are kind of famous. Teeth are usually prominent. They're carnivores. So these piranhas are carnivorous. And the pharyngeal teeth are present, but they're not greatly modified. So we don't see these major sophisticated teeth like you see in the suckers. Adipose fin is present. This is usually a key characteristic. So see this little tiny teardrop fin there? That's an adipose fin. That's typically characteristic of only a handful of families, and so that's a good one to look at. Tenoid scales are present in some, and so like you see the scales here on the other side of this fish there. They have a physostoma swim bladder. So again, the swim bladder connects to the esophagus, so they can come to the surface and gulp air to fill that swim bladder. And then they use that for buoyancy control, and also because it's attached to the inner ear, it helps them to hear. They're often brightly colored, again, which is part of the reason why tetras are aquarium fish. And also they're quite silvery. So this is sort of a characteristic piranha. About 1,350 species total in this family here. So it's quite a large family. Mostly freshwaters of South and Central America, also in Mexico and somewhere in Southwest Texas, and also some characins in Africa. So it's primarily a freshwater fish, and mostly it's in warm waters. And so if we look here at some examples of characins, we can see here are the piranhas. Now these things have these prominent, when we say prominent teeth, this is what we're talking about. It's pretty easy to see that you don't want to put your finger in the mouth of this fish because it can bite you. And again, they got these like kind of brilliant silvery sides. But really the teeth, as much as these things may eat flesh, really they're preying on dead and dying stuff, and they're scavenging. Really, they also eat a lot of other stuff like fruit and seeds. And so these teeth are sort of designed to help shred that as well. And if you look at the very closely related pacu, I mean, when you look at these two fish side by side, they almost virtually look identical, but when they open their mouths, it's quite different. So these things here, again, can sort of graze on flesh if they need to, but the pacu really have these dental pads, really, and they primarily eat seeds and fruit that fall into the water. So very similar looking fish, but you can sort of see when we talk about how the jaws can be very similar in structure, but they can be modified by two closely related fish for two different dietary styles is what we're talking about. So piranha and pacu are a good example of that. So I got a video here showing how piranha can deflesh something relatively rapidly. And here it is right here. This is the piranha feeding frenzy. So you're gonna see these guys lowering some fish into the water, and you'll see how fast these piranha can feed.
Fill the tank then? Yeah. Okay. Before you do that, okay.
Bag.
Yeah, if you can hold that up just like you're doing, that'd be great.
You're editing sound over this, aren't you?
They're going for the eyeballs at the bottom.
you're not gonna be able to pull it like that.
And there is the piranha feeding frenzy. So you can see those teeth are designed to swim up and tear a chunk out of something. That's sort of the design there of those jaws. And also then to tear and shred or crack nuts, or to shred the skin of, like, say, fruit if it falls into the water. So that's what these jaws are designed to do. This one here is a little bit more carnivorous than the pacu. Also, these are very important food fish. They're consumed a lot down in South America, and the piranha is actually a very good tasting fish. A lot of people eat piranhas, and also pacu. So that's other examples of characids. Here are some more. The pike characids, they have these elongate pike-like bodies, like a cigar-shaped. Large mouth, canine teeth. These are carnivorous. Again, Panama, South America, so really warm water, fresh. Max length 40 inches, about 7 species. The Mexican blind cavefish, another characid. It's really a tetra of the characids. It is a very interesting fish. These are the same species. One has eyes and pigment, and the other one doesn't. The difference is if the fish are developing in caves away from light, they do not develop eyes, and they never develop pigmented scales. Only if they're in the exterior of a cave, like in a river or a creek, where they have sunlight, they actually develop functional eyes and pigmentation. So fish that develop in caves lose their eyes. Fish that develop in light retain their eyes. And when the lens, if you take the eye of this fish and transplant it into the blind cavefish, they will begin to develop an eye. So it's obviously a developmental adaptation. So these things also are able to bounce sound waves through the water on off objects. And so kind of like sonar, they can hear very well. And again, we're talking about Australophysian fishes that have a very good hearing apparatus. And so they don't really need eyes if they can hear very well. And so when they don't have pigment in the skin, they literally are transparent. So this is like, you can see the blood pigments through their skin. And again, these are in Yucatan, Mexico. The eyed fishes are as far as north as South Texas in little rivers up there. So very interesting developmental feature there, the blind cavefish. These are used in biomedical research a lot because of tissue regeneration, right? You can actually get an eye to regenerate by transplanting it. It's pretty cool. So those are family Characidae. Here's another couple examples. Headstanders. Anyone seen these every now and then in aquaria? They're around. They're popular aquaria fish. They have these bright spots on there. Sometimes there's a stripe. Primarily herbivores. They actually swim like this, sort of at a 45-degree angle, and they graze on algae down in the stones on the benthos. And so they're algivores. Sometimes they'll eat small worms and other inverts as well. Max length about 4 inches. Again, South America. And here is the African tigerfish, the piranha of Africa. Look at the teeth on this. You can tell it's a carnivore. It's a predator. And the tigerfish have these razor-sharp teeth along with streamlined muscular bodies. They can leap out of the water and catch birds in flight. Largest is 6.5 feet, 110 pounds. So here is a video of a tigerfish leaping out of the water to catch a bird flying. Here. So the tigerfish. So when we say that they're a predator, that's what we mean. They're not just eating other fish with these teeth. They're actually eating other animals, so things like birds and things like that. So these things are quite voracious predators. So again, family Characidae. We're now going to move into order Siluriformes. And again, this is really, people call these the silurids. Really, it's the catfishes, the mad toms, and the bullheads. A surprisingly diverse group of fish. 34 families, 2,400. Widespread both in the Old World and New World. So they're across the Americas, Europe, Asia, Africa. Mostly, you know, they're freshwater fish, but there are marine species. There are marine catfishes. Characteristics here as a group. They have 1 to 4 pairs of barbels on the snout and shin. Adipose fin is usually present. And so again, this teardrop fin here, located towards the caudal fin. Naked, so no scales, just skin. In some cases, they have very hard plate-like scaled. So there are the armored catfishes, which are again mostly marine. Those ones are mostly marine, and I'll show a photo of those later. But it's an evolutionary throwback, going back to these old armored fishes that lived on the bottom of the benthos. It's like sometimes, despite being millions of years later, you still go back to the same old strategy. And so the armored catfishes are very reminiscent of some of those ancient extinct fishes. The hard spine is hardened, really hardened at the front of the dorsal and pelvic fins. So when you look at the first spine here, it's very hardened, bony element. In some cases, serrated. So you can sort of see these serrations on here. This is a defensive mechanism. In some species, it's venomous. So these things usually don't kill you, but anyone's been caught with one of these, they're very painful. In particular, the small fish, like the mad toms, like this guy here, the really small mad toms, that poison or venom that they produce is very painful if you get stuck by these spines. Eyes are usually small. They're oftentimes, like you can see these tiny eyes here. They're mostly a nocturnal scent predator. And so they got these pairs of barbels here on the head, which are characteristic of the family. This is for tasting their surroundings, including the benthos, where they feed often. They do not have any intermuscular bones in the fillet. So if you go on the side of this fish, there's no bones in the meat, which means it's actually a very good eating fish. It's a popular food fish. And so that's one of the characteristics here. The European wels is one of the largest strictly freshwater fishes at 16.5 feet, 725 pounds. So a very large fish. Here's one of those wels right here, the European wels. If we look here then at our first family that we'll be talking about, that's family Ictaluridae, the bullhead catfishes. Amyris catus is the white catfish. Ictalurus punctatus is the channel catfish. These are ones you need to know for the lab. We call this Ictalurus punctatus because the Latin word for spot is punctatus. It's the spots on the side of the channel catfish which gives it its name, like a punctuation mark, like a period or a comma. It's a spot. So Ictalurus punctatus. 4 pairs of barbels on the head, no scales. They're naked, just skin. Omnivorous freshwater bottom feeders. 45 species in the family. They do lay eggs in nests, and the males then provide parental care. So the males provide a parental care in a nest bed. Max size 6 feet, 100 pounds, and really that's the flat head, I'd imagine. There are some pretty big blue catfish out there, but Pylodictis olivaris is probably the largest of the family. Prize sport and food fish. It's actually the #1 cultured fish in the United States is in fact channel catfish. And so it's a very popular food fish, and so everyone's seeing these fried catfish fillets like this. So that's family Ictaluridae, the bullhead catfishes. So your prime representatives there are Ictalurus punctatus, which is the #1 cultured fish in the country. Other local examples of silurids in North Carolina, the Carolina mad tom. It's a very rare species, very small, 5 inches, right? These mad toms are sort of small. Here's that little adipose fin we're talking about, this characteristic. This is a species of special concern in the Tar and Neuse rivers. Diet is on, again, larval midges, mayflies, caddisflies, insects, insect larvae really, and other small aquatic insects. The tadpole mad tom is an invertivore, again, eating small insects, and also can filter feed some plankton. So these things have kind of a chubby or what we call deep-bodied aspect to them. Max length about 5 inches. Look at this is a nest, for instance, in a flower pot. And again, the male mad tom is going to be in there guarding that nest. And so oftentimes they like to lay their eggs in rocks, logs, and vegetation, or in some kind of like hole like this. And the male then guards the eggs and until they hatch, and then the fry start hanging around there. So anyone's gone out, what is it, noodling, where they go out and stick their hand in the hole to try to get the catfish to bite onto them. I heard a student a year or two ago said that that's called grabbling in some places. I don't know, but really what you're doing is you're getting that male in there to defend the nest and bite onto your hand. So typically the male is the one that's biting in that case. So that's order or family Ictaluridae. Family Ariidae, the sea catfishes. So here's Arius felis, the hard-headed catfish. And again, these spines are hardened, some cases venomous. 2 to 3 pairs of barbels. Now notice these are a lot longer than in family Ictaluridae. So long barbels here on the head. Anterior and posterior nostrils are very close together. So they've got very closely paired nostrils here. About 120 species in the family. Really one of the main characteristics here is that they have these very large yolk sac larvae. So you see these bellies on these things, that's the yolk sac. These very large yolk sacs on the larvae, and the male actually carries these things in its mouth. So the male protects the larvae by holding them in his mouth. So these things don't build a nest, they literally carry them around in their mouth. Family is tropical to subtropical worldwide, mostly marine. There are some freshwater species, but really these are mostly marine. And so you'll see these larval catfishes here have these giant yolk sacs. So that's one of the main characteristics there of family Ariidae. Here are some other silurid examples. The long whiskered catfishes, family Pimolidae. 100 species. These whiskers, in some cases, are as long as the body is long. So characteristic there is these very long whiskers. The red-tailed catfishes. You know, sometimes you'll see in the aquarium or the pet shops these orange-like catfishes. Well, they're a freshwater aquarium fish, but if they get released into the wild, this is a fish from Florida. They get pretty big. It's one of the reasons why you should never turn away your aquarium fish. If you don't want them anymore, either give them back or kill them. Don't put them out in the wild because they can turn into megafauna that is undesired. Here are these armored catfishes I told you about, mostly marine. Look at these heavy armored plates these things have. So most catfishes are scaleless, like this one or this one. But these catfishes here have heavily armored plates, and they are very reminiscent to those ancient placoderms and things like that they were talking about. So again, evolutionary throwback. Obviously, this strategy still works because this particular group of fishes came back to it. So those are some interesting then examples there of other silurid catfishes. Now, here's one that's an interesting one. The pencil or parasitic catfishes. It's about 155 species. Now, shown below here is the infamous candiru. Now, this thing swims up the urethra of mammals, including human beings who are bathing in places like the Amazon River. They're what we call rheophilic. They're attracted to urea secretions. And what they do is they will swim up a stream of urine into the urethra. And because these things have hardened venomous spines, they'll then extend those spines and lodge themselves in the urethra. Now, this is a warning poster from South America saying don't do this in the freshwater rivers because these things can go up in there. So it's a problem in the freshwater tropics. Now, remember when I showed that video of the fisherman getting stuck in the leg with the stingray spine? Well, I have a video of a kangaroo here for everyone to see. I'm just kidding. I can't do that. But these things are actually, this does happen. And so these warning posters go out. I do have a video here of a walking catfish. So these are walking catfish. You can find these down in Florida, for instance. They actually can breathe. Their gills are designed to breathe both air and water. And so you can actually see these things walking around, especially after a rain when the ground is wet. So here is a video of a walking catfish. I believe this is by a swimming pool. And this is a person took this video. We arrived home in Lakeland, Florida one evening to find a walking catfish hopping through our yard and down the street. So here is this walking catfish.
I figured they should walk the buckets more. No, Jules, the funniest thing is to take them in the grass.
Oh my gosh.
It's just amazing.
That is freaking blowing my mind.
You know, I was sitting in the house and I looked out in my backyard. I said, it looks like there's a fish on the lawn. And I figured there's an eagle.
Yeah, there's a fish on the lawn.
I figure an eagle flew by and dropped his food.
Well,
like-
you'd think the birds would be, the hawks and stuff would be swooping in and grabbing these
No,
things.
there's like a dozen walking in my grass.
I just,
Just,
I can't. Do they not have gills? Are they like frogs or something?
So those are the walking catfish. Kind of crazy. So lots of diversity there, family, or order Siluriformes in general. Also, when we talk about these venomous spines, here, you can see the spine is dislodged in this person's back here. There's care to be taken here. These things aren't like poisonous, they're going to kill you. But if you fall on them, for instance, what they do is they extend this dorsal fin spine and both of them their pectoral fins, and they sort of form a tripod, and they do that defensively. And so if something's trying to eat them or if they become scared, they will do this. And if you fall on them, those spines are extended out, they can impale yourself. And so handle these with care. When I used to work at the fish farm, we actually had a guy fall off of one of the banks. We had seined up a bunch of catfish and had them in just a few inches of water. And he tripped and fell off the bank and put his hands out like this when he fell into the water. And sure enough, a catfish spine went right through his hand, stuck out the top of his hand. And his brother was there, and this guy's got this catfish wiggling around on his hand. And he's like, we have to get this thing off. And so his brother says, all right, on the count of 3, I'm going to yank this catfish out of your hand. And he went 1, 2, and yanked it. So he didn't give him to 3. But I seen that, and that went right through his hand, right through the palm and stuck out the backside of his hand. So that's a real thing. Also of note here, look at again, here are these armored catfishes, but look at this, modified caudal fins, lots of diversity here in this group. But again, barbels, adipose fin, and then hard spines in the fins are pretty much good characteristics, but lots of diversity here amongst this group. So very, very much variation there. So with that, that's the end of the catfishes. And that's the end of Ostariophysi. Again, these fish that hear very well. The Clupeomorpha hear pretty good too, but Ostariophysi are the super sense of hearing. We're going to now move into Protocanthopterygii. And I sort of show a picture here of a muskellunge. This also includes things like the salmons, the trouts, the smelts, mud minnows, and pickerels. So Protocanthopterygii, this group here. So we're going to move into that group next. So here, Superorder Protocanthopterygiae, order Isaciformes. Now, if you notice here, we say many teeth on the premaxilla. We talked about the jaw evolution. The premaxilla is sort of one of those bones that goes away in the more advanced fishes. This is pretty much the last time we're going to see this premaxillas in these groups of fishes here. Here they are. Look at all these teeth here. This is the skull of a pike, and these teeth are specially designed to process vegetation. These things eat aquatic weeds. I'm just kidding. These things are predators. These teeth are here for capturing other things that are most likely trying to swim away. So these are very prominently anchored teeth. Notice they're all angled inwards as well, which means if you're inside of the mouth of this thing, you're trying to swim out, these things are preventing you. They're trapping you inside. So very much a piscivore. Actually, I'd say mostly carnivore, because we'll see that they don't just eat fish. There are no pyloric ceca in the gut. Now, when we talk about anatomy later, we'll talk about this more, but these are pyloric ceca. These are like these little finger-like extensions on the gut, usually in the small intestine. And they aid in digestion. They provide surface area. So one of the characteristics here is that these fishes don't have it, and we'll see it in more derived fishes. But for now, just know that they don't have it. And these are called isacids as a group. Some people call them the pikes and the pickerels, like this here is a chain pickerel. So our first family here is Isacidae, the pikes and the pickerels. Esox maskinongi is the muskellunge. Here is a muskellunge, probably the largest of the group in group family Isacidae. Duck-like snout with sharp teeth. Look at this. Duck-like snout, sharp teeth. Elongate body. Elongate body. Dorsal fin and anal fin and pelvic fins are all very much to the posterior end of this animal, which again, it tells us is sort of a less derived fish. Oftentimes the caudal fin is forked. And so it's because these are lion weight predators. They don't necessarily swim all that fast, but they can execute burst swimming speed, and I'll show a video of that later. 5 species in the family. They are oviparous. They lay eggs that sink, or in some cases are adhesive and stick to weedy areas along the banks, usually in a few feet of water along the shoreline. No parental care. External fertilization. Max length about 4.5 feet for the muskellunge. We were doing my master's degree research, and we were routinely catching 50 to 60, almost, well, not quite 60, routinely catching 50-inch long muskie in trap nets. Popular game fish, but seldom used as food. They don't taste all that well. They do not taste all that good. So family is a freshwater northern hemisphere only. So northern hemisphere freshwater, usually very cold. These are very cold water fishes. So like you see these guys always out catching these things in Canada and that on the Great Lakes and places, very cold water fish. So here is a video of muskie feeding, and when we talk about this lurking predator, you'll sort of see how this pike is here going to sneak up on these fish here, and it's going to just sort of slowly move up, and it's going to strike real quick. That's what we call a burst swimming or lurking predator, lion weight kind of predation. You see that they sort of just hang out there and then snag like that. Very quick burst swimming speed. But usually they just sort of hang around like this and wait for something to swim by, and then they are capable of very rapid bursts of speed then to attack. Now, muskellunge are not just piscivores. They can eat terrestrial animals as well. So this duck, adult duck here, and these are the ducklings. And so you're going to watch. The muskellunge are going to come up and take these ducklings.
Crikey. See the size of that? Oh, there he goes. Oh. Oh, shit.
Oh, shit. Here it goes. Oh, no, honey. Oh, no, oh, no, oh, no. Oh, my God, it took it.
That was crazy.
Poor mama.
She tried to protect it.
So that is the muskellunge. And they are what we say voracious lie-in-wait predators. They're apex predators like that. They could actually take out waterfowl, for instance. They also eat small rodents and other things like that, that, you know, muskrats and things like that that swim in the water too. So not just other fish. So that's how they get this big. Some examples of esocids here. The northern pike. Circumpolar species with widespread distribution. Again, cold water usually. Usually this thing is a dark side, dark background with light colored spots. So oftentimes like an olive green with white or yellow spots is Esox lucius, the northern. The red-fin pickerel, Esox americanus. Often also called the red-fin pickerel because of the red fins, but these things usually have a slanted teardrop and a dark green and light green alternating colored bars along the side. Esox maskinongi, the muskellunge, usually a mottled green or black pattern against a light colored or a bronze colored side. And sometimes the fins are spotted. And then Esox niger has this chain-like dark pattern with a slightly silver or white background. They've also got a teardrop. And so it's a chain-linked pattern on the side, Esox niger. So you need to know these things for the laboratory portion of the course. These are some key characteristics to look at as far as the members of genus Esox here in North America. So family Esocidae, duck-like bill, eating ducks. So next group, very closely related to those, but don't look at all like them, are family Umbridae, the mud minnows. Umbra pygmea is the eastern mud minnow. Here they are. Don't look at all like a northern pike or a muskellunge, but they are indeed related to them. Have a round caudal fin, cycloid scales, and kind of a short snout. Abdominal pelvic fins, just like the pikes and pickerels. So the pelvic fins are way back here, closer to the tail than they are to the head. Physostomous swim bladder. Again, they can swim to the surface, gulp air, fill their swim bladder for buoyancy control. 5 species in the family. They lay their eggs external fertilization, with the exception of only one female guarding the nest in one of the species. These things are basically just broadcast spawning. There's no parental care. Max length about 13 inches. So very small fish, generally speaking. They're a bottom-feeding generalist. They consume cladocerans, ostracods, chironinids, and other types of insect larvae, along with then some small crustaceans. Freshwater hemisphere, again, or freshwaters in the northern hemisphere, again, really a cold water fish in the northern hemisphere. You don't see these things in the south, just in the northern hemisphere. But again, a freshwater fish, family Umbridae. Next family, Osmeridae. Now, these are actually a food fish. You know, up in the Great Lakes area, these things are very popular to eat. The smelts, Osmeridae. The rainbow smelt is shown here. You know, what people do is they batter these things. Sometimes it's beer batter, and they deep fry them whole and eat them like French fries. You can dunk these things in ketchup. And so a lot of places up north will serve these, a basket of fried smelts. Small, slender fish with a large mouth for its size. It does have an adipose fin right here. The maxilla is in the gape and it's toothed. It's got a relatively large jaw here. 13 species. Mostly they spawn in freshwater. They broadcast spawn, external fertilization, no parental care. They have cycloid scales. Max length is about 16 inches. Usually these things are about the size of a cigar. Some are commercial. For instance, the capelins, again, we can cook these things and eat them. And so they're a food fish. They eat zooplankton and also benthic crustaceans and some smaller fishes. Again, they got a relatively big jaw for their size, so they can actually prey on other small fishes. They're marine, anadromous, and also coastal freshwaters. Like I said, you can get these in the Great Lakes. You can get these along the East Coast and the estuaries and things like that. Again, mostly in the Northern Hemisphere, kind of a cold water fish, not in the Southern Hemisphere. And so these things are a popular food fish. The fried smelts, family Osmeridae. Family Osmeridae. Salmotrutta. An exotic example of family Salmonidae, the salmons and trouts. Salmon, the brown trout is native to Europe and it's stocked all over the United States. So most people think it's native to the United States. It is not. It's an introduction. But family Salmonidae, the trouts and salmons, very characteristic adipose fin here. Very characteristic. They have what's called a pelvic axillary process. Now this is a triangular flap on the anterior part of the pelvic fin. So if we look at this pelvic fin here, this is that pelvic axillary process right here, this triangular flap. Very characteristic of this group, this family. Pelvic axillary flap. Maxilla is included in the gape of the mouth, and again, we talked about the jaw evolution several lectures ago, and you can refer to that because we give a salmon skull as an example of that. Physostoma swim bladder. These things, again, go to the surface, gulp air to fill that swim bladder. There are par marks, which are vertical bars on the sides of young in most of the species, as opposed to, for instance, the adult morph here is spotted. Also included in family Salmonidae are the chars, the whitefish, and the graylings. So like things like the Arctic char, again, the very cold water fish here. You're talking like Aleutian Islands in Alaska, up into Canada, very cold water fish here. 66 species in the family. They are oviparous. The female will dig a nest called a redd, and then they will pair spawn in that nest with the male. So the fertilization occurs exterior, and the eggs then incubate in that nest. And oftentimes the nest is dug into a river or a creek in the stones or rocks. Max size, 6.5 feet, 250 pounds for the Siberian taimen. These are called salmonids as a group. And it's a very common name, salmonids. And it's family Salmonidae, so it's actually a pretty easy one to remember. Native distribution is freshwater and also anadromous in the Northern Hemisphere. Europe, the brown trout were introduced into North America, but there are native salmonids here as well. And so that's family Salmonidae. When we talk about the reproductive cycle of salmon, we can look here at this figure, and we'll start here. I always like to start with the spawning cycle. So here, salmon are anadromous. So like salmon, smelt, shad, striped bass, sturgeons are common examples. They hatch in freshwater, spend their life in the sea, then return to freshwater to spawn. Remember, this is the opposite of American eels, which are catadromous. They live in freshwater. They live in, the catadromous eels live in freshwater rivers and then swim out into the Atlantic Ocean where they spawn in the Sargasso Sea. So if we look here at the salmon entering fresh water, swimming upstream to spawn. They go on this spawning migration. They then change color and form, in some cases morphs, and they get this curved or hooked beak, and then oftentimes they can change to a shade of red, for instance. And again, they dig these nests in the stones, lay their eggs in there, and the fertilized eggs then incubate in that red. The adults then often die after the spawning migration. The idea here is that when the adults die, their decomposing bodies fertilize the river or stream. So as these things have died, they rot and release nutrients. These eggs oftentimes don't hatch. It takes salmon eggs several months to hatch. I'm going to say like, I don't know, 2-3 months, something like that. It's very cold water. So while these things are developing, their parents are dead and decomposing. And so by the time their nutrients have been released, they produce phytoplankton blooms that the young then feed off of. And so these things hatch. They're called alevins with these yolk sacs on there. And that's the plankton blooms that are the predecessor, or that have been created from the parents' bodies, then feed the offspring. They use the yolk sacs, feed on those plankton blooms, and then they become parr. And again, these are the ones where they have these vertical parr marks on the sides of their bodies. And these things are preparing to enter into the ocean. So they're still in the fresh water, but as they're preparing to become estuarine fish, they undergo an ability to tolerate salt water. They get these parr marks. They then swim out into the ocean, where they feed. They get large. There's lots of food in the ocean. They get large. They mature into adults in the ocean environment, and then they return to the freshwater river to spawn and repeat the cycle. So that's sort of the cycle here of the salmon. And this single spawning followed by death is called semelparity or semelparous. That certain fishes do that. So this is a particular strategy, and apparently it works pretty good. So that's the salmon. Some other examples here of salmon. The brown trout, again, I said European species, widely introduced in the United States during the 19th century. Stocked in the U.S. streams as a game fish. So here's Salmotrutta, the brown trout. The lake trout, freshwater, native to northern parts of North America, principally Canada, and also Alaska, but really the United States, the Great Lakes. Salvelinus namakis. The sea lamp, this is the fishery we talk about, the sea lampreys destroying. This is one of them. They really took out the lake trout. So these things really got nailed by the sea lampreys. Rainbow trout. Also, people think the rainbow trout's native to North Carolina. Absolutely not. It's been stocked here. It's actually native distribution is out towards the West Coast, and it's actually kind of restricted. The real rainbow trout actually behave just like a salmon. They live in fresh water, then they go out into the ocean and mature, and then return to spawn. And when they do this, they're called steelhead. They don't have this pink body morph. They turn, or these spots, they turn silver color when they go into the ocean, and they become anadromous. And so that's the typical life cycle. But when we stock rainbow trout in freshwater lakes to catch, they don't ever change their color pattern, so they do this. But this is an introduced species in North Carolina, Oncorhynchus micus. Probably one of the most widely introduced species in the United States, to be honest, is the rainbow trout. So those are some examples of salmonids, again, that you might have to know for class. And so with that, we'll talk here about the next group. We're going to talk about the lizard fishes here, Cycloscomata, and then the lantern fishes here. So here we are on this tree, again, moving down. So when we look at this, the families that we're kind of remember, family Cynodontidae, the lizard fish. Now, cynodont means scissor tooth. Remember, dont is like dent, dental. You're going to the dentist. Cyno is scissor. So the scissor-toothed fish. And in this case, the example is the inshore lizard fish you might see in North Carolina, Cynotus fatens, the odorous scissor-toothed fish. These guys get kind of creative with these names. So, large oblique mouth with many small canonical teeth, hence the scissor tooth name. Small canonical teeth. You can sort of see these teeth here along the mouth. Adipose fin in most species. So they do have a dorsal adipose fin here and here. Relatively small cycloid scales. So it's very small armor. They're lion weight predators on the bottom, mostly on fish and crustaceans. So they sort of have very good camouflage. They sort of sit on the bottom, wait for something to swim by, and then they eat it. So very good camouflage. They're a cryptic species. 55 species in the family broadcast their eggs. So external fertilization, no parental care. It's the usual thing with fish. Max length is about 2 feet. Worldwide tropical and temperate marine distributions. Oftentimes they're on sandy bottoms, sometimes near coral reefs or some kind of other underwater structure like this, where they blend in very well and then are able to hunt effectively. So that's the inshore lizardfish. The family of fish is Cynodontidae, the scissor-toothed lizardfish, Cynodont. Next family here, and I think this is the last one we'll talk about today, is the myctophids, Myctophidae. And you hear the word myctophid tossed around. These are very characteristics. These things are called the lantern fishes because they glow in the dark. Okay? They have numerous small light organs called photophores that are bioluminescent. And they're actually species specific. See these spots here along the side of them? These are species specific. So this particular species is going to have the spots like this. A different species is going to have different organization spots. So it could be that these spots, the individuals within a group can recognize conspecifics based upon the pattern of these glowing photophores. They emit a bluish light via a chemical reaction. Luciferin is a compound that's processed by an enzyme called luciferase. And this reaction is conducted by symbiotic bacteria that live inside of these photophores. These bacteria then create this glowing color. Now, these things live in the deep, deep water. And so part of this is providing the light. You can see they've got a relatively large eye. Maybe they're actually producing their own light so they can see around them. And also they're producing light so they can recognize others in their own species. Large terminal to subterminal mouth. This is a physoclist. So if you're living in the deep ocean, deep enough that you have to generate your own light, it's not like you're going to be swimming to the surface anytime soon to fill your swim bladder. So they're a physoclist. What that means is they have this gas gland organ that fills their swim bladder using oxygen from the blood. So they have a specialized swim bladder called a physoclistus swim bladder. In some cases, these things are so deep that they don't even have a swim bladder because they don't need buoyancy because they want to be on the bottom. Extremely abundant, one of the most abundant fishes out there. And we're going to talk about the deep scattering layer in the next slide. They're a very important prey fish for the deep ocean. They're what we call mesopelagic, open ocean, very deep water. 235 species in the family, broadcast spawners, no parental care, external fertilization, fertilized gametes float away. Same old thing. Max length about 5 inches. Family, marine, all oceans, Arctic to Antarctic. So they can be in warm water, cold water. They just want to be in deep water, which is typically cold water. So when we talk about the mesopelagic and the family Myctophidae, the myctophids, and the deep scattering layer, this is one of the most crucial parts of the food chain in the ocean. So this is what we call the deep scattering layer, the DSL. So this consists of diverse fish assemblages and also some invertebrates that migrate between 1 to 4,000 feet deep to 30 to 300 feet deep during the night. So during the day, they go deep, and then at night, they come up to feed. Now, this is a pretty impressive migration because you can imagine the pressure shift that's going to occur, the pressure differential that occurs going from 4,000 feet to 300. And when we say they're abundant, look at this photo here. This is how thick those myctophids can be in that deep scattering layer. So a lot of other fish eat these things, and a lot of other fish actually follow these migrations. So they sort of know that during the night, a lot of these things are coming up into the shallows, and so they preferentially feed their nocturnal feeders. And it's not like these things that got like a built-in light, so it's not hard to find them. So they have a caudal luminous organ right here, located right above the caudal peduncle, dorsal to it. And males will chase females. And so they call this behavior stern chasing. And so our idea here is that maybe this caudal light is for predator confusion, but my guess is it's probably some kind of mating ritual, like where the females or the males can notice these organs here, and they can sort of, again, they know the color patterns down the side, so they know which members of their own species are, and then they can reproduce that way. So my guess is it probably has to do with attracting mates. Also, when these things spawn and release their gametes, when they hatch, these are what the fry look like. The larvae, the eyes are on stalks that grow outside of the head, and their intestine is on the outside. Very odd larval stage. Very odd larval stage. And so this is the myctophid larvae are very strange in this regard. But I'm going to say major characteristic here is glows in the dark with photophores, member of the deep scattering layer. Those are your key terms there for family Myctophidae. So here's a video here of myctophids, and you can sort of see them underwater. And you can see, I think this is a cuttlefish feeding on them, but you can sort of see them glowing in the dark here. So when we say very abundant, that's what we're talking about, is that there's always a lot of these things around. And again, they make these migrations vertically. Again, they're usually chasing food towards the surface. Okay, so that is family Myctophidae. And so that's the last family we'll talk about today for this lecture. And so I've got a story now. You learned it here in AAC 441, the color of salmon. So, you know, again, people go online and they talk about, I don't know, all sorts of ridiculous stuff on social media or whatever. You know, that they poison fish in the seafood industry and they dye them and all this. Well, this is what's going on. So people may have heard this. This is a piece of farm-raised salmon, right? It's got orange color to it. So the marine diet provides salmon. Remember, salmon, again, their adult stage is living in the ocean. They come back into fresh water to spawn. So they're anadromous. So their adult life in the ocean provides them with things such as shrimp and krill and other things that contain compounds which give the flesh a red color, right? So they eat these things, and in doing so, gives the flesh a red color. So when they're out in the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, they're eating crustaceans, shrimp, and krill, and it gives the fillet a classical salmon color, wild-caught salmon. Now, these crustaceans that they're consuming contain naturally occurring biological pigments called carotenoids. These compounds are also found in carrots, and that's why we call them carotenoids. Again, biologists are pretty simple when they name stuff. Carrots have this stuff, let's call them carotenoids. Also, things like sweet potatoes have this, right? Which is why sweet potatoes are yellow. So these compounds appear yellow, orange, or red in color, and they're part of the natural diet. Now, if you're farming salmon, those farmed salmon do not eat this natural crustacean diet, but they instead feed on a prepared, dry pelleted diet that resembles pet food, like something you'd feed your dog or your cat. These prepared diets contain fish meal, you know, ground up fish meal. We talked about the major fisheries, right? Like Peruvian anchoveta, menhaden, these kinds of things. But also soybeans, corn, gluten, canola oil, wheat, gluten, poultry byproducts like blood meal, things like this, among other ingredients. Again, similar to those used to feed hogs or like cat food. Now, carotenoids, astaxanthin and canthaxanthin, are then added to the diet to give the farm-raised salmon a similar color profile, because these prepared diets don't contain carotenoids. So they add the carotenoids to it. So like if you were to feed a salmon the prepared diet with no carotenoids, look at this. This is what it looks like. Now, it looks kind of like a trout fillet, right? Like rainbow trout or something. But most people, when they see Atlantic salmon, they expect it to be nice and red, not white. And so most people at the grocery store are like, oh, I'm not buying that white salmon, as fickle as consumers are. So they say, well, if you're not going to buy the white salmon, let's add some carotenoids to it, and we'll do the best we can. We can't get it red, but we're going to get it orange. So that's why the salmon fillets are orange. They literally take these carotenoids and add them to the diet. And they don't do it the entire time. They only do it what they call a finishing diet. So like the last few weeks before the salmon are harvested, they feed them this, and it gets incorporated into the fillet really quickly. Like for instance, if you were to take a wild salmon out of the ocean and put it in a tank and feed it this diet, over time, the flesh would turn white because this pigment is eventually lost. So kind of cool. That's why farm-raised salmon's orange. It's because of these crustaceans that are a part of the typical diet. So that is the color of salmon story in the background there. They don't dye the meat. They literally I guess they dye it in the sense that they put a carotenoid in the diet and feed it to the fish, and then the fish incorporates it into itself. But it's not like they're processing this fish and dyeing it orange. That is farce. So with that, that is the end of the lecture. And so I have a few minutes here. I'm going to stop recording now.